Good afternoon and welcome to our 5th annual TEDxWVU event. My name is Allie Satterfield and I am the student chair and licensee of TEDxWVU. Lauren Moore and I will be your host for today's event. The TEDxWVU student team has a goal of creating unity within our community and beyond. Our theme looks to the future, hoping to share ideas and begin conversations that will bring us all together. The theme for today's TEDxWVU event is What's Next?
The goal of today's event is to connect you, our WVU community, with a space where you can indulge in new ideas and create new connections.
Before we begin, we would like to make sure that you are all aware that today's event will be recorded and will be posted on the official TED website. We're also live streaming our talks on the WVU Arts and Entertainment YouTube channel. So it's very important that everyone remains seated until the conclusion of our show.
Now is a good time to turn off or mute your cell phones so we don't have any interruptions. You'll be able to view today's talks on our website, and we encourage you to post about your experience today on social media and tag TEDxWVU, TEDx, TED, and West Virginia University in your posts. Now please turn your attention to the screen behind me for a short presentation from TED.
Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
We would like to take a moment and express our sincere gratitude to our sponsors, WVU Arts and Entertainment and the WVU College of Creative Arts. Without your support and dedication to our event, none of this would have been possible. Your support has given us the opportunity to produce our event today and to continue to help further the mission of TEDxWVU.
So sit back, relax, and prepare to be inspired and enlightened. Our first speaker is Dr. Clay Marsh. Dr. Marsh serves as West Virginia University's Chief Health Officer, focusing on finding statewide solutions for health and well-being. As the national leader in academic and personalized medicine and in pulmonary and critical care. Additionally, he leads the academic health science centers at WVU, including the schools of dentistry, medicine, nursing, pharmacy, and public health, and co-leads WVU Medicine, West Virginia's largest healthcare enterprise and largest employer.
In response to the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Marsh was appointed the COVID-19 czar by West Virginia's governor in March of 2020. In this role, he coordinates the state's response to COVID-19 by collaborating with federal, state, and local agencies, health officials, researchers, and other agencies aiding in the effort. Through his talk, he hopes to address this time of transformational change and the underlying lessons that many of us may be seeking. Although many may feel fear and threat right now, Dr. Marsh will speak on some very valuable lessons present today for all of us. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Marsh with his talk, How Do We Heal After COVID? Lessons from the Field.
$11.3 billion. The number of COVID vaccines that have been delivered around the world. 562 million, the number of COVID vaccines that have been delivered in the United States. 2.2 million, the number of lives saved because of vaccinations. 1.1 million, the number of vaccines that we've given to people here in West Virginia. Number 50, the position the Kaiser Family Foundation judged West Virginia to be going into the pandemic with the highest risk of population and the most likely worst outcomes in the country. Number 1, West Virginia was the first state in the country to test all nursing home residents for COVID-19. West Virginia was the first state in the country to immunize all nursing home residents and to boost those residents for COVID-19. West Virginia was the first state in the country to recognize the really important role of age in outcome and recognize that people 50 and over accounted for 97% of our deaths. So despite being judged as the most vulnerable, we did well. Why? We did well mostly because we came together as a group. We were brought together by the governor and connected between the National Guard, the military apparatus, the Department of Health and Human Resources, and our COVID team, which included West Virginia University and others. As we went forward, the governor gave us a very clear higher purpose, which was to save lives, protect the health and well-being of our citizens, maintain our hospital capacity, and to keep the state together. So we recognized as a team that at one point we lost supply chain from China and Italy and needed to make our own personal protective equipment, which we did. We realized that we didn't have appropriate testing, so we brought a team together from the university, aided by the National Guard, and we made our own genetic tests, we made our own swabs, we made our own viral transport media to take samples, and we still use those today. We made our own antibody tests when variants started to pop up. We made a collaborative between Marshall and WVU, and we created next generation sequencing so that we could identify which variant was present in the state of West Virginia. We also leaned on the expertise of our business school to keep track of the number of cases, working with CDC. And when vaccines became available, we were cognizant that although the federal plan was to take everything centrally through the federal pharmacy program, which was CVS and Walgreens, we recognized because of input from our long-term care facilities and pharmacy board that West Virginia didn't have CVS and Walgreens in rural parts of West Virginia. There was family-owned pharmacies and private pharmacies, and we decided to be the only state in the country that did not activate the federal pharmacy program. But we weren't being rebels. We talked to the federal government, Operation Warp Speed, and they said that makes great sense. And because of that move, West Virginia became the first state in the country to vaccinate our most vulnerable people, which clearly saved a number of lives. We worked with our public interest communication research group here at the Reed School of Media to make sure that we were targeting with evidence basis our messaging, telling people how they should approach vaccinations, because we did see more and more that we had people that were resistant to vaccination. We also had the governor who promoted West Virginia. West Virginia really changed its reputation during the parts of the COVID pandemic from a state that maybe wasn't really ready to the little engine that could, the diamond in the rough, a place where we were really innovative. We came together. For the first time in 50 years, West Virginia gained population, became a destination. But let's look at some other numbers. 150 million, the number of people worldwide who have long COVID. 25 million, the number of people here in the United States with long COVID. 25 million, the projected total number of people who have died from COVID-19 using excess death data and artificial intelligence across the world. 6.2 million, the number of people documented to have died across the world with COVID-19. 983,000, the number of people that have died in the United States, more than all the world wars put together. 2.2 million, the number of people who have been rescued from the vaccines. 100,000, the number of people who have died of overdose during this time, during the last year, the first time that's ever been reached. 6,753, the number of West Virginians who've died of COVID-19. 17 years, the difference between the life expectancy in McDowell County, West Virginia, versus the best county, highest life expectancy in the country, which is Summit County, Colorado. 5 years, the difference in life expectancy between the United States and other comparative countries. 2.5 years, the number of life years that has been lost in our population during the last 2 years, the first time that's happened since the world wars. In 2020, that loss of life expectancy was from African American and Hispanic communities. This last year, it was from rural white communities. Number 50, the place that West Virginia has as far as national rankings related to heart disease outcomes, blood pressure control, diabetes. Number 49, the rank West Virginia has for obesity. Number 45, the position that West Virginia has in per capita deaths. Despite doing well at the early stages of the pandemic, we have lost a whole number of West Virginians. So what can we do about this? We know that COVID can affect people at any age, and we know that people that are unvaccinated have much higher risk from outcome from COVID-19 than people that are fully vaccinated, as we talked about with the 2.2 million saved lives. But we also know that in the absence of vaccines, people that are older, people that are sicker, people that are heavier have the highest risk of dying or having most severe outcomes from COVID-19. So if we look and try to satisfy our governor's intent for us, which was not only to save lives, but to maintain and support the well-being of our citizens, how do we do that? Well, let's first try to define together what health and well-being mean. And as you start to piece it together, it's kind of hard to define, but for me, easiest to define by saying that health is where our body's real age, our biological age, is less than our birthday age, our chronological age, and disease is where our body's real age is greater than our chronological age. So the older you are biologically, younger in years, then the less healthy you are. And if you'll buy that definition, then let's look at longevity studies where people live long to get some of the ideas of the triggers that might be the most important. And in a couple of the best longevity studies, as opposed to what you might expect, which is people didn't smoke and they exercised regularly and they ate well and they slept well, that may be important too. But the things that really came out of these studies that made a difference were the meaningful relationships people had, particularly friendships and marriages that were really good relationships over 50 years old. That people stayed still challenged with problems. Acute stress was good for people. And we'll talk about chronic stress and whether that's good for people or not. Also, people had great intent for their lives and had a higher purpose, important. So let's look at some studies then that start to define some of these issues related to triggers that might impact longevity. And again, we're using longevity as a surrogate for health. So the first one was brought up by our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, who talked about loneliness being a pandemic as well as COVID is. And as we look at loneliness, a study from Cigna Health System, an insurer, found that 60% of their respondents reported being lonely. And loneliness here is the absence of meaningful relationships in quantity or quality that you want. You can be around a lot of people and still feel lonely. And in fact, if you look at our workforce, 76% of our workforce during COVID has felt burned out. And when you look at loneliness, loneliness acts like 15 cigarettes a day to reduce your lifespan. Loneliness causes you to see the world as threatening, turns on our fight or flight response, makes our cortisol levels go up, which make us heavier, make diabetes more prevalent, and make us feel that we don't belong. We're part of a dangerous world. And because of that, we find ourselves not finding things pleasurable. Dopamine responses are reduced. So let's ask the question then, from the standpoint of our feeling that we fit, the feeling that we belong, the feeling that we're safe, and people that are lonely don't feel safe either. And we know from studies from Google that the most important parameter in the performance and the satisfaction of their best teams is high degrees of psychological safety. So if we ask the question, if feeling unsafe causes you to age, let's turn to work from a Nobel laureate. And this is work from Elizabeth Blackburn and her colleague, a behavioral psychologist, Alyssa Appel, in San Francisco. And they did a groundbreaking study of a group of women who were very well educated, who had high standards of living, average age 38 years old. And the purpose of the study was to ask if biological aging happened and increased with perceived psychological stress. Elizabeth Blackburn won the Nobel Prize for her observation of telomeres, the caps of our DNA, like the end of our shoestrings. The more the cells divide, the shorter the ends of the DNA get, and it marks our biological age. And they gave these women a validated questionnaire, 10 questions, looking at their perception of stress. And importantly, what they found is the higher the perception of chronic stress by these women, the more they age biologically. And again, remember, their average age was 38, and it turned out that there was a 17-year biological life difference between the least aged and the most aged of these women, which I think is remarkable. The other thing that they found was that the women who perceived the most chronic stress weighed statistically more than their peers. So we know that looking at the world through a lens of sympathetic overdrive of stress makes you older and makes you heavier. So if we look at Appalachian, West Virginia, we turn to another Nobel laureate, Sir Angus Deaton, and his colleague and wife, Professor Ann Case, and they found in 2018 that there was an observation that 158,000 people died who were white, non-Hispanic, who were high school educated or less, and they died of suicide, overdose, and liver disease from alcoholism. And they dug deeper and they found they died of despair and hopelessness. And these people felt left behind. They saw the world as a place that didn't care about them. And importantly, education made them more resilient from this, but also jobs did, because jobs is, for many of us, our purpose. And lastly, what happens to our kids who are traumatized? A study from the Kaiser Family Foundation found that if children and adults looking back during their childhood felt that they had stress, trauma, made up of a 10-question survey with trauma, neglect, family dysfunction as part of the questions, then if your answer was 1, which was the average answer in America, then you had a much higher risk of having diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, cancer, et cetera. If your score was 4, and we did a small study in Charleston with the score 4, then your lifespan was predictably reduced by 5 years, your risk of suicide up by 1,200%, and your resistance to vaccines is present, as has been documented. If your score was 6, and in Hillbilly Elegy, J.D. Vance's score was 7, then your lifespan is predictably 20 years reduced. And we know that in the case of McDowell County, West Virginia versus Summit County, Colorado, we see a 17-year life expectancy difference. So how do we handle this? Let me give you one more number. And that number is 1. The root word of health is the same root word as heal, holy, holistic. It's hail, and it means whole, together. When we separate health from our relationships, from our communities, from our work, from our schools, from our education, from hope, then we get sick, and we get heavier, and we die early. Brené Brown, the researcher and author, reminds us that people that thrive feel like they're enough, feel like they're deserving to have great things happen to them. In a meeting between the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, in the Book of Joy, they say that the thing that sustains them, that gives them joy, is the knowledge that we are all interconnected, that they are one of 7.9 billion people on this earth, and they're grateful for what they have. They don't need more. So for all of us, I would say that the journey to health is one in which we are on in our own right, which is our journey in our life, but also it's the ability to reach out and make sure that people feel included. People have a place to feel safe, a place where they belong. And I'll end with a greeting that many of you have heard or said, Namaste, which as I understand it, translates to the divine in me bows to the divine in you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marsh. Our next speaker is Lauren Marcourt. Lauren is a freshman elementary education major who grew up in Wheeling, West Virginia. At WVU, she serves as a college senator on the Student Assembly of the Student Government Association, and she is a lead student ambassador for the College of Education. By working for the College of Education, Lauren's passions for teaching and inspiring others has only continued to grow.
Ever since she was a little girl, Lauren has dreamed of becoming a teacher just like her mom. However, the older she got, the more she realized the depths of problems within the education system, as well as the value of a good education. The challenges as giving students a good education through equity and equality has piqued her interest to attending WVU. Through her talk, Lauren hopes to show everyone what benefits can come from receiving an education that you love. Now it is my pleasure to present Lauren and her talk, The Value of a Good Education.
I'm going to take you on a trip back in time for a second. We're in 2012 at Middle Creek Elementary School in Triadelphia, West Virginia. I'm 9 years old in Mrs. Smith's third grade class. It's the end of the 9 weeks, so that means it's time for a garage sale. Throughout the school year, I've been collecting Smith bucks for turning in my homework on time, being polite, cleaning up the classroom, etc. And as the little aspiring overachiever that I am, of course I had to have the most Smith bucks, meaning I had first pick at the garage sale. I had my heart sold on this little pack of school-themed erasers. Nothing else seemed to matter, besides whatever was for lunch that day, whether it be in the cafeteria, hopefully chicken tenders, or the little sandwich my grandma packed for me and wrote a note on. By a show of hands, how many of you have had a teacher you absolutely loved? Okay, good. Now, by a show of hands, how many of you can't recall a teacher you loved or an experience similar to mine with Mrs. Smith? Okay. For those of you who can recall a teacher that you loved or an experience similar to mine, congratulations. You have had a good teacher in your lifetime. For those of you that maybe couldn't, unfortunately, you may have a really bad memory or you experienced a lackluster education. I have wanted to be a teacher my whole life. Most of this desire can be attributed to my mom, or as most students know her, Mrs. Marcourt. My mom has been a teacher in the public school system of West Virginia for 30 years now, and there has yet to be an instance where I've gotten to meet one of her students who didn't absolutely love her. This still inspires me to this day. On the other hand, I've also had a handful of teachers such as Mrs. Wilmeth, Mrs. Conley, Mrs. Smith, Miss Green, and Mrs. Bush, who all continued to inspire me and allow me to fall in love with school and my education. The impact they left on me also sticks with me to this day. However, I don't want to paint an inaccurate picture for you. I also had a handful of teachers I wasn't too fond of either. The impact they left on me also sticks with me. They inspired me to not be like them. This brings us to the question of how do we measure the value of a good teacher? In order to break this down a little bit better, First, we're going to pick up our pencils and write down the need for equity in education. Then, we are going to erase all the mistakes associated with trying to provide an equal education. By doing this, we'll be better able to see the staples of what makes a good teacher in the eyes of students. And by the end, you might see that everyone is a teacher at least once in their lifetime. First, let's start off by breaking down exactly what educational equity is. According to the Center for Public Education, educational equity is achieved when all students receive the resources they need, so they graduate prepared for success after high school. This essentially means that students are met with pencils, paper, backpacks, etc., when they can't acquire one on their own. Most school systems do a pretty good job of this already. Speaking for my own county, when COVID-19 hit hard, my county worked to provide personal Wi-Fi networks to students who didn't have them at home. This allowed them to continue their online education at a time when it was needed the most. Let's think for a second now about our own lives. Let's say we're making chocolate chip cookies. Now, let's pretend we're getting all the ingredients out: flour, sugar, butter, vanilla. But wait, don't have any chocolate chips. Well, shoot, now we're frustrated and there's no cookie to be had. We get so upset, we take all the ingredients, put them away, and go back to sitting on the couch, angry. This is a prime example of how a student can feel if they don't have all the ingredients they need to learn and be successful. According to an article from Johns Hopkins Medicine titled "Helping Students Get What They Need to Succeed," 2 out of every 25 students won't graduate in Central Maryland. And if a student isn't reading on their grade level by 3rd grade, they are 4 times less likely to graduate by age 19. Lack of backpacks, notebooks, and other school supplies are just another barrier to success. If students aren't met with all the resources they need to succeed, the success is less and less likely to come. However, having school supplies ultimately isn't the only resource they need. Having a qualified teacher is just as important as having a sharpened pencil. However, educational equity isn't the only facet of a proper education. Educational equality is just as important, if not more. Feeling safe in your environment is just a key to living a normal life. And according to the same source from the Center for Public Education, educational equality is achieved when all students are treated the same and have equal access to similar resources. Sometimes unequal educational situations arise from things teachers cannot control, such as a student's family of origin, their gender, or social class. While there are things teachers can't control, there are also things they can. Teachers can provide lessons to students in the classroom with all different types of people as the protagonist in the situation. By showing students that anybody can be the hero of their story, they are more likely to go out and be the hero in their own lives. Equality in the classroom sets students up to be inclusive of everyone throughout their life. This inclusivity is so important for students to be able to associate with others in the proper way that allows our world to continue to grow. According to renowned interior designer Celery Kemble, there is a reason we don't see the world in black and white. When it comes down to it, no one can really disagree that children deserve the best education they can possibly receive. After going through the public school system for my K-12 education, I'd say I have a pretty fair assessment on what being a student is like. However, I wanted some other opinions from people who had experiences maybe different than mine. I made a Google form and sent it out to a variety of people I know here at WVU, all from different areas, different backgrounds, and different lifestyles. The results of one specific question shocked me. When asked the question, "Have you ever had a teacher that made you not want to come to school?" 89% of students surveyed said yes, they had. As a student, I can understand this, but it was also sad to see and hear. However, as a future teacher, it inspired me. One of the reasons I'm so passionate about what I'm telling you today is because I want children, teenagers, and adults alike to all love learning. We never stop learning in our lives, and once we are educated, that knowledge can never be taken away from you. If we aren't nurturing our students properly and giving them a good education, we could be missing out on all the greatness they can show our world. I recently read an article titled, "Measuring What We Value While Valuing What We Measure," that posed the question, does it even matter if it doesn't get measured? A lot of times in education, teachers just teach the curriculum necessary to get students through the end of year testing. While this curriculum is extremely important, I cannot stress enough that the most important lessons a student will learn are not the ones in a textbook. When I asked students on the Google Forum to tell me about their favorite teacher and why they were their favorite, not a single one said because of the content that teacher taught. Instead, I received responses such as, "My favorite teacher was my favorite because every day they made sure to connect with each and every student. They never gave up on me, always had a positive attitude, and never assumed I wasn't trying. They made everyone feel welcomed, and they were excited to teach every day, which made the students want to learn as well." Today, we looked at what we can do better to provide an equity education to students as well as an equal education to students. And in doing this, we saw that teachers are some of the most important people in a person's life. Remember how at the beginning of this I told you that everyone could potentially be a teacher in somebody's life? Well, think back for a second. If you have ever had the opportunity to teach someone how to do something or help someone, you have been a teacher. You made a difference in that person's life. You became a potential source for their future inspirations and dreams and goals. My own teachers, even the ones I didn't mention in this speech, have all shaped my life and inspired me in some way. However, my parents, my older sister, my friends, and my family have also shaped my life and inspired me. And none of them are real teachers besides my mom. What's next for this world of education, you may ask? Our children are the next generation of learners, thinkers, and doers. If we aren't providing them with a proper education, our world will suffer because of it. The true value of a good education is not measured in standardized testing. It's measured in the amount of positive change we can see in our world. I can only hope to continue to become a catalyst for that change. And although many of you will never become real teachers, you all have the capability to inspire that change too. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Our next speaker is Rania Zuri. Rania is a junior at Morgantown High School and the CEO and founder of the Literary Society, a West Virginia youth-led organization with the mission of promoting the love of reading among children ages 3 to 5 from disadvantaged families.
Concerned about the vast book deserts that exist in rural areas where children do not have access to books at home, Rania started the West Virginia Head Start Road Tour, in which she gifted a brand new book to each and every child enrolled in Head Start in the entire state of West Virginia. She is also the president of UNICEF at Morgantown High School and is interested in Appalachian studies, as well as poverty issues in rural America. Please join me in welcoming Rania, presenting Eliminating Book Deserts, One Book at a Time.
So how many of you have books at home? I would say most of us have at least one book at home. But imagine not having any books as a young preschool or kindergarten age child. Imagine having no reading materials at home, not one. On top of this, imagine you are too little to go and check out a book yourself from the library and are in a critical period of early literacy development. Imagine You are a child from a disadvantaged family where there's simply no resources or any disposable income to spend on items like books, since getting by day to day is a struggle. Well, this is the reality for many children in America and is known as the book desert. But what if I told you that you, as an individual, can make a difference in ending the book desert and access to literacy for young children? And what if I told you that you could make this difference with just one book? But first of all, what are book deserts? Well, these are geographic regions where reading materials, like books, are difficult to obtain. These geographic regions can be anywhere from counties and cities to small communities and in the homes themselves. In this country alone, book deserts abound, specifically in rural America and places linked to poverty and low income. According to the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten, over 32 million children in the US go without books. And 45% of our nation's children live in neighborhoods that lack public libraries and stores that sell books, or in homes where books are an unaffordable or unfamiliar luxury. The US Department of Education also reported that up to 61% of low-income families do not have any books for their kids at home. Book deserts are ubiquitous, and this is having a detrimental effect on early childhood literacy in America. Research has shown time and time again the importance of books in developing childhood literacy skills. In my own experience, I've witnessed the effects of the book desert in rural Appalachia myself, and have seen the desperate need to address this issue. I've talked extensively with many teachers who all confirmed that the book desert is alive and well, and that many of these disadvantaged children do not have even one book at home. This is not because the families do not want books. It is simply because they do not have access to books. And programs that we all hear about, like Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, are not available in many parts of rural America. For example, in Moorfield, West Virginia, the teachers told me how they've been desperately trying to get their preschool children from disadvantaged families into these types of book donation programs, but there was simply no local funding partner to pay for the books or the postage as required by these programs. In order to end book deserts, we must go beyond simply placing books in low-income areas. This has already been done through free book vending machines, direct mailing services, and more. Although this does help, this is not enough. Throwing random books at the problem is not going to help. The topic of book access is a much more complex and multifaceted issue, and some of the programs I just mentioned are still inaccessible to the nation's most vulnerable children. Libraries are also not the solution to the problem as well. At the emergent reading stage, these children are too little to go and check out a book themselves from the library, and their caregiver or parents don't necessarily have the time to take them to the library. Now more than ever is the time to think about what's next regarding book deserts and how we can eradicate them. So what can we do to help these children? Well, I actually did a project where I donated a brand new book to every single child in Head Start in the state of West Virginia. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Head Start is a federally funded preschool program for children between the ages of 3 to 5 that live at or below the poverty line. This West Virginia Head Start Road Tour, as I called it, was challenging because there were almost 7,000 kids in Head Start in the state. I knew that the one book I was giving them had to count. It couldn't be just some random children's book in order to have the most impact. I got a curated list of the favorite titles that are regularly used and loved in the pre-K classrooms so that there would be the very necessary classroom connection aspect. For example, in Hampshire, Hardee, and Grant counties in West Virginia, I donated to every child in Head Start there their very own copy of the beloved children's book, The Mitten. And throughout these counties, the Head Start teachers did mitten-themed enrichment activities for a week. As you can see, the children made their own craft mittens, learned about the moral of the story, and even learned about each type of animal featured in the book. The suggested activities were all free from the internet, and the crafts were made with just basic classroom supplies. The children, as you can see, made what could only be described as a magical connection to the chosen book, because they were exposed to the story in the classroom and then got to take that exact book home. Some even eventually learned the story by heart, despite not knowing how to read fully. Now you must be wondering at this point, what can I do as an individual? I'm not a teacher or a literacy expert. I don't have an organization, so what part can I play in ending the book desert? Well, you can actually make a huge difference at the micro level. One method is that you can adopt a Head Start classroom. You could join forces with friends and family and give just one book to every child in the Head Start classroom. This way, you can make a direct and meaningful impact on a child's life. But don't just get them any random book. Because at this age, preschool children, the vast majority of them do not know how to read yet. If you give them just some random children's book, they will not know what to do since they haven't been exposed to it in school, and their parents or caregivers might not necessarily have the time to read it to them. This is why it's very important to donate classics and beloved pre-K favorites, because the child will then be able to make the classroom connection to the story and learn from it even at home. Think about your favorite book when you were a preschool-age child. Maybe it was Cat in the Hat, or The Very Hungry Caterpillar, or if you're like me, Pete the Cat, and donate that one book to a child in Head Start. You could even get a list from a teacher of the pre-K favorite titles, and you undoubtedly find a familiar or favorite title from your own childhood. Donate a book to a child impacted by the book desert and poverty. Studies have shown that just one book can make a difference in a child's literacy development. Just one book. Think about this for a moment. Not a library at home, not shelves filled with books, just one book. You can make a difference, and it can all start with the donation of just one book. The book desert is real, and millions of children go without books as a result. This can't continue. But we can eliminate the book desert, and we can do it one book at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rania. Our final speaker is Rebecca Irwin. Rebecca is a senior at West Virginia University from Wheeling, West Virginia. She's majoring in chemical engineering with a minor in Spanish. She also works as an undergraduate researcher and serves as the president of the American Institute of Chemical Engineers. She grew up in a space where femininity and art were significant parts of her identity. STEM was a later discovery. Upon entering college classes where men were in the dominant demographic, she experienced a strange shame in her femininity that led to self-doubt.
With this internal pressure to suppress key components of her identity to belong in an academic space, she became hyper-aware of our internal biases against diverse expression in professional settings. Rebecca's talk will highlight the need to advocate for diversity not just in numbers, but in the freedom to authentically express gender, sexual, and cultural identity in work and academia. Please join me in welcoming Rebecca with Fusing the Elements of Feminine Expression in Professionalism.
When I decided to major in chemical engineering, I was met with a lot of responses like, oh good, we need more women in engineering, and not enough women are in STEM. But I never really questioned why that is. Why women aren't pursuing technical sciences. And what it would mean for me to enter into a male-dominated field. I come from a background enriched with women. I was lucky to be in a high school class filled with women who excelled in academics and took accelerated math and science classes and encouraged me to do the same thing. So I never really imagined a scenario where this wouldn't be the case. So when I entered WVU as a freshman and began to take classes in engineering, I was shocked at the difference in demographic. I was lucky to be amongst 4 students out of 40 in a class, or 4 women out of 40 students, walking into class, drowning in a sea of black backpacks and flannels with a professor and students who were all men. I felt like a phenomenon that everyone was watching. I didn't feel supported or understood. I didn't know how to trust or relate to my peers. I was often the only woman in group projects and felt lonely as I engaged in conversation that was very one-sided and didn't really concern me or my interests. I wasn't forming study groups. I wasn't making friends in engineering. Not only did I feel outnumbered, but I felt a novel sense of discomfort in my femininity. When I wanted to wear feminine clothing, put on makeup, accessorize myself in a way that made me feel pretty, I'd walk into class and feel weak, fragile, stupid, and alone in my feminine interests. I felt like a target, like I had solicited being hit on and only perceived sexually by simply wanting to look and feel good in a STEM setting. I began to question if I had chosen the right major. I felt like my love of fashion and art and life couldn't coexist with my career. I wasn't finding many women who were like me in my classes. Instead, I felt like a lot of us were acquiring a masculine persona to exist in a STEM environment. In cases of conversation that I've had with women in STEM, I've noticed nuances of defensiveness and objection against femininity. Like we're trying so hard to be perceived as a smart STEM student that, oh, we don't care about girly things. This internal pressure to suppress my identity stifled my initial growth at WVU. I was scared to join student orgs and try research. I convinced myself that I didn't belong in high-achieving academic environments. I would never find peers like me. And if I was going to stay in this whole engineering thing, I'd have to learn to endure this colorless culture throughout my career. At first, I was excited to be a woman in STEM and ready to take on a rigorous major. But I didn't anticipate battling feelings of shame and self-doubt on top of it all. It's now commonplace to advocate for diversity in the workplace, in terms of numbers and percentages and pie charts. But we don't talk about what this means in terms of culture. We hold a bias to what the wearer of intelligence and success looks like. With white men historically being at the forefront of competitive fields, today's idea of professionalism was built on the white male prototype. We have standards of dress, hair, vernacular, and conversation that we have to abide by to be taken seriously. neutral tones, pleats, sleek hair, a little bit of makeup, not too much, dialect that is derived from upper-class regions. As a result, women, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and LGBTQ+ folks have to code switch to be compatible with today's existing dynamic of white male success. As a result, it's not just a wage gap that impedes us from entering male-dominated fields. It's the lack of community, belonging, and freedom of expression. We argue in favor of a work-life balance, but we also need to fight for life, comfortability, culture, and expression in a work environment. So how does this bias persist in professional settings? It's a huge disadvantage in terms of opportunities. We have to work way harder to prove ourselves and our worth despite our forms of expression. Also, it kind of sets a dynamic where we're kind of expected to meet white men where they're standing and adapt. Sure, every office is well aware of when it's March Madness. Men get permission to lose professional composure over a busted bracket. Yet we are to engage in conversation that is palatable to men. As women, many of our traditionally feminine interests are ridiculed and dismissed as frivolous. We're encouraged to modify our tone in emails and be direct with few exclamations, to not be perceived as feminine, as if being kind and accommodating is a form of weakness. Regardless of the percentages of diversity in a workplace, when we all morph into this standard, we're perpetuating racism and sexism and homophobia to thrive in these nuanced biases. As a result, our creativity is stifled, we drown from imposter syndrome, and we suffer from burnout walking on eggshells trying to maintain this facade. Being a minority in a professional setting requires an unfair dose of resilience. I personally am incredibly lucky to be in chemical engineering, where I found a community of women and mentors who made me feel comfortable and where I was able to slowly grow and build confidence. I commend those of you who are passionate enough in your career to stay in a space of isolation in your identity. I know personally I do not have that strength. If it wasn't for the support that I found, there's no way I would have stayed in engineering. We need to evolve into a culture where going to work or school authentically doesn't require courage, but is rather encouraged. Now, reforming stigma is difficult because it's not a law or policy where we can just flip a switch. Instead, it takes years of self-reflection and confrontation to unlearn harmful patterns. Though I'm giving this talk and trying my best to champion femininity, I can tell you that I still struggle with this. You know, when I see someone in passing wearing a cute feminine outfit, I don't often make the subconscious association that, oh, they could also be a PhD candidate in mathematics. It's that legally blonde conundrum. It's something that takes work, but we need to be willing to do it. When confronting this bias, I first encourage you to reflect on how professionalism may be negatively impacting your quality of life. What aspects of your personality do you value? What are your metrics of a cool person? Do you feel comfortable expressing these parts of yourself in a professional setting? It's important to recognize our personal associations with this issue, to then begin to identify our unique role in creating the freedom to live authentically. This is really important for us to be better mentors. When you're in a position of leadership, I encourage you to be authentic and bold in your expression. We need mentors who we can resonate with our interests and passions and personality. We need to encourage vulnerability and expression of fears and self-doubt and breaking down this pressure to always appear stable in a competitive environment. This also has the role in recruitment of diverse groups in numbers. You know, think of it this way. When you're a 10-year-old and you have no family in STEM, you probably just don't randomly decide one day that you're going to take a bunch of high school AP classes to then major in engineering, to then get a PhD, to so on and so on. You try things that interest you because likely a mentor who you look up to and resonate with somehow guided you there. As adolescents, we grow interests in areas amongst peers that share our personal interests. And this later manifests itself into careers. We need to give mentees the vision of authentically belonging in any field. Finally, I want to call to those with the biggest obligation to combat this issue. And those are the ones who benefit from today's standards of professionalism. Being a white cisgender woman myself, I certainly benefit from this structure in a multitude of ways. My whiteness and resemblance to society's definitions of what a woman looks like make it a lot easier for me than it is for others to conform to this mold and be perceived as competent in my field. It's our responsibility to identify our biases against various marginalized groups. We're all pretty fluent in the way that straight white men behave, and as long as everyone conforms to the standard, we're pretty comfortable in a diverse setting and feel no obligation to learn about the culture of our colleagues. But to create more inclusive dynamics, we need to educate ourselves about marginalized groups. What do they struggle with? What forms of expression are important to them? Observe your initial subconscious reactions against these groups. For example, how do you intrinsically react to African American vernacular? Does it align with your standards of intelligence? In your space of work, how would you perceive the presence of afros, men wearing skirts, acrylic nails, hijabs, tattoos? What aspects of professionalism do you value? Are they useful in terms of getting a job done? Or do they simply build a wall to only allow a certain group of people to be leaders? Unpacking your biases with inner dialogue and difficult questions is crucial to retrain yourself to think differently about this issue. Also, recognize your privilege and the ability to safely exist authentically. It'd be super easy for me to call upon this diverse group and say, to always be authentic in your expression, in all spaces. But there is immense privilege in safe expression that many Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and queer, and gender diverse individuals do not have. It is our responsibility to empower minorities and embrace their expression in all spaces. Ultimately, we would all benefit from creating a dynamic that is more inclusive. It would allow us to experiment with our expression and appearance and be feminine if we choose, without worrying about how our respect from colleagues is going to be affected. It would empower genuine interactions and make belonging accessible for all. Comfortable workers are better workers. A comfortable team is a better team. I believe that our generation is our best chance at redefining professional standards. Through social media, we've grown to be uniquely empathetic learners. We understand the importance of inclusion from an innate level. We need to be the forefront of this movement, continuously identifying ways in which biases persist, both within ourselves and within all structures of society. Let's fight for a future where it's not radical to enter a profession where your individuality is welcomed as an asset. There is strength in diversity, but there is power in expression. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Again, we thank each of our speakers for sharing your ideas today.
That concludes today's event. We would like to thank everyone for joining us for our 5th annual TEDxWVU event. We hope today's presentation empowers and inspires you to start conversations. We would like to thank our speakers for their ideas and sharing with us today.
I would like to take a moment to express my sincere gratitude for the time and hard work the TEDxWVU student executive team and volunteers have dedicated to our event. Additionally, I would like to again thank our sponsors for your continued support, and Lauren, thank you for co-hosting alongside of me today.
The TEDx team would like to extend our greatest thanks and appreciation to Allie. Allie's been a part of our organization for 4 years now. Without her continued hard work, dedication, and commitment, none of these events would be possible. Allie, we cannot thank you enough for your hard work for TEDxWVU, and we cannot wait to see all you accomplish. If you are a WVU student and would like to be a part of the TEDxWVU team, please send an email to tedxwvu@mail.wvu.edu. Thank you all again for attending today, and we hope you enjoyed the 5th annual TEDxWVU event.